The September wind carried the scent of dying grass across the Colorado Territory, and Samuel Hayes pulled his worn hat lower against the dust. At 42, he'd learned to read the land like other men read newspapers, every crack in the earth told a story, every shift in the wind warned of change coming. His weathered hands gripped the reins as his horse, Patience, picked her way through the rocky terrain beyond his ranch borders. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. Sam rarely ventured this far from home. 3 of his cattle had wandered off during the last storm. The man couldn't afford to lose livestock, not in these lean times. The drought had been merciless, leaving the one-screen valleys brown and brittle. Most of the smaller homesteads had already failed, their families packed up and gone east. Leaving behind only broken dreams and empty cabins, it was the sound that stopped. Himfirsta, rhythmic clanking that didn't belong to the natural symphony of the high plains. Metal on metal, steady and desperate. Sam reined in patience and listened, his gray eyes scanning the landscape ahead. There, about a quarter-mile off, stood the remains of the old Brennan place. The family had pulled out 2 years ago, leaving behind a sagging barn and a house with more holes than walls. The sound came again, and with it, something else, a whimper so faint it might have been the wind. But Sam's ears were sharp from years of listening for trouble. He'd learned that skill during the war, when the difference between hearing and not hearing could mean the difference between living and dying. He urged Patience forward, and as they crested a small rise, Sam's breath caught in his throat. Behind, the collapsed barn, barely visible through the weathered slats, was a figure so small and still he almost missed it. But the chain glinted in the afternoon sun, and the reality of what he was seeing hit him like a physical blow. A girl, no more. Then 8 or 9 years old, sat hunched against a fence post. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, where iron shackles had rubbed the skin away. Her dress, if the tattered brown fabric could be called a dress, hung loose on her tiny frame, and her bare feet were caked with mud and worse. But it was her eyes that tore at Sam's heart. They were hollow, empty of everything except a bone-deep exhaustion that no child should ever know. Sam dismounted slowly, not wanting to startle her. He'd seen enough broken things in his life to know that sometimes the kindest approach was the most dangerous one. The girl's head lifted slightly at his approach, and he caught a glimpse of matted dark hair and a face so thin it was almost skeletal. "Easy there, little one," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. Sam was a man of few words, had been since the war, since Mary died. Since the world taught him that most things worth saying were better left unsaid. But this child needed words, needed the promise of safety that only a human voice could provide. Girl didn't respond, but her eyes tracked his movement as he approached. Sam had worked with enough frightened animals to recognize the look she was measuring distances, calculating whether she had enough strength to run, even with the chains. Holding her fast. "I'm not going to hurt you," Sam continued, stopping about 10 feet away. "My name's Samuel Hayes. I live about 2 miles that way." He gestured toward his ranch, though the girl's eyes never left his face. "What's your name, sweetheart?" No answer. Sam hadn't expected one. He could see the fear radiating from her like heat waves off Summerstone. But underneath the fear was something else, a flicker of hope so small and fragile. It was almost invisible. Almost. Sam looked around the abandoned homestead, his jaw tightening as he took in the evidence of recent habitation. Boot prints in the dirt, horse tracks, the remains of a fire pit. Someone had been using this place, and they'd been keeping this child here like an animal. The thought made his hands clench into fists, and he had to consciously force them to relax. "I'm going to help you," he said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "But first, I need to get those chains off you. I'm going to come closer now, all right?" The girl's breathing quickened, but she didn't try to pull away as Sam approached. Up close, he could see the full extent of her condition, the bruises on her arms, the cuts on her hands, the way her ribs showed through the thin fabric of her dress. But it was the calluses on her palms that told the real story. These weren't the soft hands of a child who'd been playing in meadows. These were the hands of someone who'd been working hard and long, doing the kind of labor that would break a grown man. Sam knelt beside the fence post, examining the chain. It was secured with a simple padlock. Nothing fancy, but solid enough to hold a child who lacked the strength to break free. He pulled out his knife, a tool he'd carried since the war, and began working at the metal links closest to the girl's wrists. "This might take a minute," he said, not looking up from his work. "But I'm not leaving you here, I promise." What? A promise he'd made to God on too many sleepless nights, alone in his cabin, with only the wind for company. "If you ever give me a chance to make a difference, to be the father I always wanted to be, I won't waste it." He'd whispered those words into the darkness, never expecting an answer, never believing that prayer could travel the distance between earth and heaven. The first link gave way with a sharp crack, and the girl's eyes widened. Sam looked up at her, meeting her gaze for the first time. Her eyes were brown, he realized, the color of rich soil after a good rain. They were beautiful eyes, or they would be once they remembered how to hope. "Almost there," he said, returning to his work. The second link proved more stubborn, but Sam's hands were strong from years of ranch work, and his determination was stronger. When the chain finally broke, the girl's arms fell to her sides, and she let out a small sound. Not quite a sob. Not quite a sigh. Sam sat back on his heels, giving her space. "There, you're free now." But freedom, he knew, was more than just the absence of chains. This child had been hurt in ways that went deeper than physical wounds, and healing would take time. Time and patience, and the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. The girl tried, her legs shaking with the effort. Sam resisted the urge to help Hirsch. She needed to do this herself, needed to feel her own strength returning. When she finally stood, swaying slightly, Sam smiled for the first time in months. "Good girl. Now let's get you out of here." As he helped her toward his horse, Sam heard the distant sound of approaching riders. His blood ran cold. Whoever had done this to her was coming back, and they wouldn't be happy to find their captive gone. Sam lifted the girl onto Patience's back, then swung up behind her, feeling how fragile she was against his chest. "Hold on tight," he whispered, and spurred his horse into a gallop. Behind them, the wind carried the sound of angry voices and thundering hooves, but Sam didn't look back. He was riding toward home, toward hope, toward the beginning of something he'd never dared to dream possible. The girl in his arms was silent, but her small hands gripped his shirt with surprising strength. And for the first time in years, Sam Hayes felt like he was exactly where God intended him to be. The ride back to Sam's ranch took an hour, and by the time they reached the wooden gate bearing the weathered Double H brand, the girl had fallen asleep against his chest. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and Sam could feel the trust in her small body as she leaned into him. It was a trust he didn't take lightly. The Double H spread across a valley between two ridges, its fields brown now from the drought, but still showing the careful attention of a man who understood the land. The house was modesta, two-story structure, built from local pine and stone, with a wide porch that faced the mountains. Sam had built it himself 15 years ago, back when he'd believed it would be filled with children's laughter and merry singing. But Mary had been gone for 8 years now, taken by the fever that swept through the territory one harsh winter. The house had been quiet since then, echoing with memories and Midio bins. Now, with this child in his arms, it felt different. Still quiet, but expectant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Sam dismounted carefully, cradling the girl so she wouldn't wake. She was lighter than his saddle, all sharp angles and hollow spaces where childhood should have been. As he carried her up the porch steps, she stirred, her eyes fluttering open with the startled look of someone who'd learned to fear unexpected movement. "Easy, sweetheart," Sam murmured. "You're safe now. This is my home." The girl's eyes darted around, taking in the porch swing, the wooden rocking chair, the carefully tended flower boxes that held Mary's marigolds, the only flowers that seemed to thrive in this dry climate. It was a home that spoke of quiet comfort, Of a man who took pride in simple things done well, Sam pushed open the front door and stepped into the main room. The space was clean but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture that showed the marks of careful craftsmanship. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel holding a few books and a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The girl's gaze lingered on the photograph, and Sam wondered if she remembered having a mother or if that memory had been buried under too much pain. "Are you hungry?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer. The girl nodded, a tiny movement. That spoke volumes about her desperation. When had she last eaten? How long had she been chained to that post? Sam set her gently on the sofa, noting how she immediately curled into herself, making her body as small as possible. It was a defensive posture he recognized from his time with wounded animals, the instinct to hide, to protect the vulnerable parts. "I'll make you something to eat," he said. "But first, let's get you cleaned up. You've got some cuts that need tending." The girl's eyes widened with fear, and Sam realized his mistake. She didn't know him, didn't understand that his intentions were good. All she knew was that another adult wanted to touch her, to move her, to have control over her body. Or Sam said quickly, "You could wash up yourself. The wash basin's in the kitchen, and there's clean water in the pitcher. I'll get you some clothes that might fit better than what you're wearing." Relief flickered across the girl's face, and Sam felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it almost knocked him backward. Whatever had been done to this child, whoever had hurt her, they'd stolen more than just her freedom. They'd stolen her ability to trust, her right to feel safe in her own skin. Sam went to the chest in his bedroom, the one that held Mary's things, the clothes he'd never been able to give away, the dresses and shawls that still smelled faintly of lavender. His hands shook as he pulled out a simple blue dress, one Mary had worn when she was young and slight. It would be too big for the girl, but it would cover her properly and give her the dignity she deserved. When he returned to the main room, he found the girl standing by the window, her thin fingers pressed against the glass as she stared out at the mountains. The afternoon light caught the dirt and grime on her face, but it also revealed something else, the delicate bone structure of what would someday be a beautiful woman. If she lived long enough to become one, Sam said, setting the dress. On the sofa, along with a clean towel, the kitchen's through that door. "Take your time. I'll be outside tending to my horse." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. Patience could take care of herself for a while, but the girl needed space. Needed to feel like she had some control over her own body, her own choices. Sam had learned that lesson the hard way during the war. When control was the first thing you lost and the last thing you got back, outside, Sam unsaddled Patience and gave her a thorough brushing, though his thoughts were entirely focused on the child inside his house. Who was she? Where had she come from? How long had she been trapped in that nightmare behind the abandoned barn? And perhaps most importantly, who were the men who'd done this to her, and would they come looking for her? Sam had recognized the boot prints at the Brennan place, had seen the way the ground was torn up from heavy traffic. This wasn't the work of one man, or even two. This was an organization, a business, and children were the commodity. The thought made his stomach turn, but it also hardened his resolve. Whatever it took, whoever he had to face, he wouldn't let them take her back. 20 minutes later, Sam heard the kitchen door open and close. When he entered the house, he found the girl sitting at his kitchen table, wearing Mary's blue dress. The garment hung loose on her frame, but it was clean, and so was she. Her hair, washed and combed, was a rich brown that caught the light coming through the window. Her face, scrubbed clean of dirt and grime, revealed a spattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks that made her look younger, more vulnerable, but it was her eyes that stopped Sam cold. They were watching him with an intensity that spoke of intelligence, of a mind that had learned to read people quickly and accurately. She was evaluating him, this child who'd been through hell, deciding whether he was safe or just another kind of danger. "Better?" Sam asked, his voice gentle. The girl nodded, then surprised him by speaking for the first time. "Thank you." Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse or screaming or both. But it was the most beautiful sound Sam had heard in years. "You're welcome," he said, settling into the chair across from her. Now, let's get some food in you. How does bacon and eggs sound? Maybe some biscuits with honey? The girl's eyes widened, and Sam realized she probably hadn't eaten a real meal in months. Whatever her captors had given her, it hadn't been enough to sustain a growing child. The thought fueled his anger, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help her now, only gentleness would. As Sam prepared the meal, he found himself talking something he hadn't done in years. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle and the horses, about the way the mountains looked when the snow first fell. He told her about the town of Cedar Falls, 5 miles down the valley, and the people who lived there. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for information she wasn't ready to give. He just let his voice fill the silence, a steady presence that asked for nothing in return. The girl ate slowly, carefully, as if she was afraid the food might be taken away. Sam pretended not to notice, but his heart broke a little more with each tentative bite. When she finally pushed the empty plate away, she looked up at him with something approaching trust. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Sam asked softly. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Emma." Sam repeated, tasting the name. It was a good name, strong and honest. "That's a pretty name. How old are you, Emma?" "9, she said, then added quickly, I'm not sure." Admission broke Sam's heart. This child didn't even know her own age, didn't have the basic markers of identity that every person deserved. But she was alive, and she was here. And that was enough for now. "Well, Emma," Sam said, "I want you to know that you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. I promise." Emma studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of hope. And sometimes, Sam thought, hope was all you needed to build a life worth living. That night, as Emma slept in Mary's old room, Sam sat on his porch and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, the way it only got in the high country, and the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. He thought about the prayers he'd whispered into the darkness, the bargains he'd tried to make with God, the desperate hope that his life might mean something more than just the accumulation of days. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The men who'd held Emma captive would come looking for her eventually. The townspeople would ask questions, demand explanations. Some would be sympathetic, but others would be suspicious of a single man taking in a strange child. Sam would have to navigate all of that, would have to find ways to protect Emma while building the trust that would allow her to heal. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, Sam's house wasn't empty. Tonight, there was a child sleeping under his roof, breathing deeply and safely in the room where he'd once imagined his own children would sleep. It felt like a miracle, like an answer to prayers he'd stopped believing could be answered. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and pine, and Sam smiled. Tomorrow would come, with all its challenges and possibilities. But tonight, he was exactly where he belonged, watching over the daughter he'd never dared to hope for. The child who'd found him when he'd stopped looking for anything but the next. Sunrise. 3 weeks had passed since Sam brought Emma home. The girl who'd once been chained to a fence post was beginning to bloom like a desert flower after rare rain. The hollow spaces in her cheeks had filled out, her eyes had begun to hold light instead of shadows, and just that morning, Sam had heard something that made his heart sing 'em all laughing. It had been a small sound, barely more than a giggle, when one of the barn cats had pounced on its own tail. But it was the first time Sam had heard joy from her, and he'd stood frozen in the doorway, afraid that moving might somehow break the spell. Emma had taken to following him around the ranch, always staying close enough to run if needed, but gradually relaxing into the rhythm of daily life. She helped with small chores, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, sorting through the vegetables in Mary's garden. She was quick to learn and eager to please, though Sam could see the wariness that still lived behind her eyes. They'd established routines that gave Emma a sense of safety. Breakfast at sunrise, chores in the morning, reading lessons in the afternoon. Emma could barely write her name, but she was hungry for knowledge, and quiet evenings by the fire. Sam had found children's books in the trunk where Mary had kept her hope chest, picture books she'd collected for the babies that never came. Now Emma pored over them with the concentration of a scholar, her finger tracing each word as Sam read aloud. But the peace couldn't last. Sam had known that from the beginning. The trouble came on a Tuesday morning. When Sam was repairing fence posts in the north pasture, and Emma was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, the sound of horses reached them first to many. Horses, moving too fast to be friendly visitors. Emma heard them too. Sam saw her freeze, a wet sheet still in her hands, her face draining of color. Then she dropped the laundry and ran toward him, her bare feet flying across the rocky ground. "Sam!" she cried, using his name for the first time. "Sam, they're coming." He caught her as she launched herself into his arms, her small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Who's coming, sweetheart? The men?" she whispered. "Bad. The bad men. They found me." Sam's blood ran cold, but his voice remained steady. "How many?" "4. Maybe 5. Emma's words came out in a rush. "They have guns. They're mean, Sam. They hurt people." Sam set Emma down gently, his hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me. You're going to hide in the root cellar behind the kitchen. You remember where that is?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide with terror. "Good. You stay there no matter what you hear, understand? Don't come out until I come for you." "What if you don't come?" The question was barely a whisper. Sam knelt down so he was at her eye level. "I will come for you, Emma, I promise. But if something happens to me, if I don't come back by morning, you take my horse and you ride to town. You find Sheriff Morrison, and you tell him everything. Can you do that?" Emma nodded again, tears streaming down her face. "I'll go hide." And Sam waited until she looked at him. "I love you. Whatever happens, remember that." It was the first time he'd said the words. Though he'd felt them for weeks, Emma's face crumpled, but she turned and ran toward the house. Disappearing around the corner just as the riders came into view, Sam walked slowly toward the front of his house, his hands loose at his sides. He'd left his rifle inside, but he still wore his pistol, the same Colt .45 that had kept him alive during the war. He hoped he wouldn't need it, but he was prepared to use it if necessary. The riders came up the lane at a canter, dust swirling around their horses' hooves. Sam counted 5 men, all armed, all wearing the hard expressions of men who'd chosen violence as a profession. The leader was a big man with a black beard and cold eyes. It's a kind of man who enjoyed other people's pain. They pulled up about 20 feet from Sam's porch, their horses snorting and prancing. The leader dismounted, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "You Hayes?" he asked, his voice carrying the flat accent of the Eastern Territories. "I am," Sam replied. "And you are?" "Name's Caldwell. I'm looking for something that belongs to me." "I don't have anything of yours, Caldwell." The man's smile was cold as winter wind. "See, that's where you're wrong. I'm missing a piece of property, and I have it on good authority that you might know where it is." Sam's jaw tightened. "I don't traffic in human beings." "Human beings?" Caldwell laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That little rat ain't hardly human. She's merchandised, Hayes, bought and paid for, and I want her back." "There's no child here," Sam said quietly. "You're lying." Caldwell's hand moved closer to his gun. "We tracked you from the Brennan place." "No, you took her. Question is, are you going to hand her over peaceful-like, or do we need to search the place ourselves?" Sam felt the familiar calm that had descended on him during the war, the strange peace that came when violence was inevitable. "I told you, there's no child here. Search the house," Caldwell ordered. 2 of his men dismounted and started toward the porch. Sam stepped into their path. "This is my land," he said, "and you're not welcome on it." "You're outnumbered 5-1, Hayes," Caldwell said. "Don't be stupid." "Maybe, but I guarantee you won't all ride away from here." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sam had learned during the war that sometimes the only way to avoid a fight was to make it clear you weren't afraid of one. The 2 men hesitated. Looking back at their leader, "You willing to die for that little piece of trash?" Caldwell asked. Sam's voice was steady as stone. "Yes." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind sighing through the pine trees. Then Caldwell smiled again, and Sam knew the talking was over. Take him, Caldwell said. Sam drew his pistol as the men rushed him, but he was 1 against 5, and the odds were impossible. He managed to put one man down before a rifle, but caught him in the head, sending him to his knees. Blood ran down his face as rough hands grabbed him, but his mind was clear, focused on one thing: protecting Emma. "Where is she?" Caldwell demanded, pressing his gun against Sam's temple. "Go to hell," Sam said. The beating that followed was methodical and brutal. Wells' men knew their business, knew how to inflict pain without causing permanent damage, at least not immediately. But Sam had endured worse during the war. He held his silence through split lips and cracked ribs. Finally, Caldwell called off his men. "You're a stubborn fool, Hayes, but we'll find her with or without your help." They tore through the house like a tornado, breaking furniture, smashing dishes, destroying everything Sam had built with Mary. But they didn't find Emma. The root cellar was well hidden, built into the hillside behind the kitchen, and Caldwell's men were city thugs who didn't know how to read the land. After an hour of fruitless searching, Caldwell stood over Sam, who was tied to a chair in what remained of his living room. "Staying over, Hayes. We'll be back, and next time we won't be so gentle. That girl belongs to us, and we'll get her back one way or another." "No," Sam said through swollen lips. "She belongs to herself, and she's under my protection." Caldwell backhanded him, splitting his lip further. "Your protection? Look around you, Hayes. See how well your protection works?" But Sam was looking. Past the destruction, past the broken furniture and shattered windows, to the photograph on the mantel. Somehow, impossibly, the picture of Mary had survived the rampage. She was smiling at him across the wreckage, her eyes full of the same gentle strength that had carried her through every hardship life had thrown at them. "She's my daughter," Sam said quietly, "and I'll die before I let you take her." Caldwell studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Have it your way. But remember, we know where you live, Hayes. We know your routines, your weaknesses, and we'll be watching." They left him tied to the chair, bleeding and battered, but alive. Worked at his bonds until the sun was setting, finally freeing himself as the last light faded from the sky. He stumbled to the root cellar, his body screaming with every step. "Emma," he called softly. "Emma, it's me. It's safe now." The cellar door opened slowly, and Emma's tear-stained face appeared in the opening. When she saw Sam's condition, she gasped, her small hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, Sam," she whispered. "They hurt you." "I'm all right," Sam said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded, then threw herself into his arms. "I was so scared," she sobbed. "I thought they were going to take me back." "Never," Sam said, holding her tight despite the pain in his ribs. "I won't let them take you, Emma, I promise." As they stood there in the growing darkness, Sam felt something shift inside him. The quiet man who'd lived alone for 8 years was gone, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. Emma was his daughter in every way that mattered. He would protect her with his life. But protection, he realized, wasn't enough. Caldwell had been right about one thing they knew where. He lived, knew his routines. As long as Emma stayed at the ranch, she would never be truly safe. It was time to take the fight to them. The town of Cedar Falls had never seen anything like the confrontation that erupted on that gray October morning. Sam Hayes, his face still, bearing the marks of Caldwell's beating, walked down Main Street with Emma at his side, her small hand clasped firmly in his. Behind them came Sheriff Morrison, Deputy Baker, 4 other men from the town ranchers and shopkeepers who'd heard Emma's story and decided that some things were worth fighting for. Word had spread quickly through the valley about the child. Labor ring operating out of the abandoned homesteads. Emma's courage in speaking up had revealed a network of cruelty that stretched across 3 territories, Caldwell and his men at the center of it all. The townspeople, many of them parents, themselves had been horrified by what they learned. "You sure about this, Sam?" Sheriff Morrison asked as they approached the Cedar Falls Hotel, where Caldwell and his men had been staying. Sam's jaw was set with determination, "I'm sure." These men have been trafficking children for years, Sheriff. Emma's not the first, and she won't be the last, unless we stop them." Emma squeezed his hand tighter. Over the past week, she'd grown stronger, more confident. The terror that had lived in her eyes was fading, replaced by something Sam had never expected to see: fierce protectiveness. She was protecting him now, just as he'd protected her, and the bond between them had deepened into something unbreakable. The hotel's front door opened, and Caldwell stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk. His face darkened when he saw Sam, but his expression changed to surprise when he noticed the crowd behind him. "Oh, well," Caldwell said, his hand moving toward his gun. "Looks like you brought yourself an army, Hayes." "I brought justice," Sam replied evenly. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall, Caldwell. You're under arrest." Caldwell laughed, but there was no humor in it. "On what charges?" "Kidnapping, human trafficking, assault, and conspiracy," Sheriff Morrison said, stepping forward with his badge prominently displayed. "We've got witnesses, evidence, and a federal marshal on his way from Denver." "Witnesses?" Caldwell's eyes found Emma, and his face twisted with rage. "You mean that little liar is going to believe the word of a worthless?" "That's enough," Sam said, his voice cutting through Caldwell's words like a blade. "You're talking about my daughter." The silence that followed was electric. Emma looked up at Sam with wonder in her eyes, and Sam felt something settle into place inside his chest, a rightness that had been missing for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like. "Your daughter?" Caldwell sneered. "She's nobody's daughter. She's a piece of property, and I've got the papers to prove it." "Your papers are forgeries," Sheriff Morrison said. "We've been in touch with the authorities in Kansas Territory. There's no legal sale of any child named Emma, and even if there were, such sales are illegal under federal law." The hotel door opened again, and Caldwell's men emerged, hands on their weapons. But they were outnumbered now, and they knew it. The good people of Cedar Falls had had enough of men like Caldwell, men who preyed on the innocent and defenseless. "You can't prove anything," Caldwell said. But the confidence was gone from his voice. Emma stepped forward, her chin raised with the courage of a child who'd survived the unthinkable. "I can prove it," she said clearly. "I remember the names of the other children. I remember the places where you kept us. I remember everything." Her voice carried across the street, and Sam felt his heart swell with pride. This brave little girl who'd been broken and chained and forgotten was choosing to stand up and speak truth to power. She was choosing to be strong, not just for herself, but for all the other children who couldn't speak for themselves. Caldwell's face went pale. "You little watch your tongue," Sam said, his voice deadly quiet, "or I'll forget that I'm a civilized man." The tension stretched taut as a wire until Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Caldwell, you and your men are under arrest. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way." Caldwell looked around at the faces surrounding him, hard men who'd lived through droughts and harsh winters, who'd fought Indians and outlaws in the land itself. These weren't soft city folk who could be intimidated. These were people who'd found their line in the sand and decided to hold it. "It's the hard way it is," Caldwell said, and reached for his gun. What followed was brief but decisive. Caldwell managed to clear leather, but Sam was faster, his war-trained reflexes taking over. The shot echoed off the buildings, and Caldwell dropped his weapon, clutching his wounded shoulder. His men started to draw their guns, but found themselves facing a dozen armed citizens who'd had enough of being afraid. The fight went out of them quickly and within minutes. All 5 men were in custody, as Sheriff Morrison led the prisoners away. Sam knelt beside Emma, who was shaking despite her brave words. "It's over, sweetheart," he said softly. "They can't hurt you anymore." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Sam felt tears on his cheeks, tears of relief, of gratitude, of love so profound it threatened to overwhelm him. "Are you really my daddy now?" she whispered. "If you want me to be," Sam said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you to be," Emma said. "I want to be Emma Hayes." Sam held her close, feeling the last of the walls around his heart crumble. He'd thought his chance at fatherhood had died with Mary, but God had had other plans. Sometimes the greatest blessings came disguised as the worst tragedies, and sometimes the family you needed found you when you least expected it. 6 months later, Sam stood in the same spot on Main Street, but everything was different. The town was bustling with activity. New families had moved in. drawn by the railroad that was coming through the valley. The Cedar Falls School had opened its doors, and Emma was one of its first students. Bright and eager and surrounded by friends who only knew her as the rancher's daughter, Emma Hayes. The adoption papers had been signed 2 weeks ago, making official what had been true from the moment Sam first saw her chained to that fence post. She was his daughter, and he was her father, and nothing would ever change that, Daddy, Emma called out, running toward him from the schoolhouse. She had grown 3 inches since coming to live with him, and her face had filled out with proper nutrition and love. She was still small for her age, but she was stronger than most adults Sam knew. "How was school?" he asked, lifting her up and spinning her around, delighting in her laughter. "Good, Miss Peterson says. I'm reading at a 6th grade level already." Emma's pride was infectious, and Sam felt his own chest swell with it. This child who'd been denied an education, who'd been treated as less than human, was proving that the human spirit could overcome anything. "That's my girl," Sam said, setting her down and taking her hand. "Ready to go home?" "Ready," Emma said, then paused. "Daddy, do you think Mama Mary would have liked me?" Sam's throat tightened. Emma had started asking about Mary recently, studying the photograph on the mantel, and asking gentle questions about the woman who'd lived in the house before her. "She would have loved you, sweetheart, just like I do. I wish I could have met her," Emma said thoughtfully. "But I'm glad she picked you to be my daddy." As they walked toward the ranch, Sam reflected on how much had changed. The house had been rebuilt, stronger than before. The root cellar had been converted into a proper storm shelter. The ranch was prospering, with new contracts to supply beef to the railroad crews, but the biggest change was in Sam himself. The quiet, lonely man who'd lived for 8 years in the shadow of his grief was gone, replaced by someone who woke up each morning with purpose, with joy, with the knowledge that he was exactly where he belonged. That night, as Sam tucked Emma into her bed, she looked up at him with Mary's blue dress folded carefully on the chair beside her. She'd outgrown it months ago, but she kept it in her room as a reminder of her first day of freedom. "Daddy." She said, "I had a dream about the bad men again." Sam's heart clenched. The nightmares came less frequently now, but they still visited. Emma sometimes reminders of the darkness she'd escaped. "What happened in the dream?" "They came to take me away," Emma said. "But you were there, and you wouldn't let them. You said I was your daughter, and nobody could take me away from you." "That's right," Sam said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "Nobody can take you away from me, Emma, not ever. Promise? Promise." Emma smiled and closed her eyes, safe in the knowledge that her father's promises were as solid as the mountains that surrounded their valley. Sam watched her drift off to sleep, then stepped out onto the porch where he'd spent so many lonely nights before she came into his life. The stars were bright overhead, and the wind carried the scent of new grass and hope. In the distance, he could hear the whistle of the train that would soon connect their valley to the wider world, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. But Sam wasn't afraid of the future anymore. He had Emma, and she had him, and together they could face whatever came next. The quiet rancher who'd prayed for a chance to be a father had found the daughter he'd never dared to hope for. And the child who'd lost everything had found the family she'd never expected to have. It was, Sam thought as he looked up at the stars, the most beautiful answer to prayer he'd ever received. And every day for the rest of his life, he would be grateful for the morning he'd heard the sound of chains rattling in the wind, and followed that sound to find his daughter waiting for him behind an abandoned barn. The past was behind them now, full of pain and loss and loneliness. But the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility and love and the promise of all the tomorrows they would share as father and daughter. Sam Hayes had found his family, and Emma Hayes had found her home. And in the end, that was all that mattered.